Is everyone else good?
Yeah.
All right. And then judges. Yeah, I'll send it right now.
Yeah.
Dude, it's so kind of you, man.
Thank you, Josh.
All right. He should be sent, so I'm going to start reading. I'm Daniel Garepis-Holland. I'm the first speaker for Palo Alto GS. Yeah. I'm excited for a great round. All right. All right, judges ready? You good? Yeah. All right. Palo Alto firms. Our first contention is a peaceful alternative. Concerns over the oil market make U.S. presence in West Asia inevitable. Brands 19 finds that calls for the U.S. to disengage militarily are commonplace. Yet U.S. interests in the region have not disappeared. Interests that have long kept the U.S. involved, such as its vast oil reserves, continue. A disruption of oil reserves would cause a disruption on a far larger scale. So long as the countries of West Asia set atop huge energy reserves, they confer great wealth and power on whoever controls it. The strategic importance of West Asia and the imperative of keeping it out of hostile hands will remain. U.S. disengagement causes chaos in the region that draws the U.S. back in with even more military pressure. Brands continues that these issues have exerted strong gravitational pull on American policy, making it impossible for U.S. officials to ignore the region. America's partners remain incapable without significant U.S. support. Withdrawals are followed by hasty re-engagements. After the U.S. left Iraq, the state nearly collapsed. ISIS surged to prominence, and emergency military intervention was needed to repair the damage. If America goes home, it will sooner or later face pressures to go big. Insofar as disengagement fails and an engagement is inevitable, it's just a question of whether it's violent or peaceful. In the status quo, U.S. presence in West Asia is violent and driven by a robust military-industrial complex influencing politics, generating a self-reinforcing cycle of wars in the region without genuine attempts at peace and stability. Helsinki Times 21 finds that the U.S. has seen wars as a shortcut to profits, prompting the government to cause one catastrophe after another. The MIC has been pushing U.S. foreign policy towards wars. Defense contractors acquired $2 trillion from the war in Afghanistan. The U.S. has launched the Kosovo War, the war in Afghanistan, the Iraq War, and many other wars in which arms dealers have made a fortune. Fiating genuine attempts at peaceful resolution solves. Genuinely committing to a goal of peaceful conflict resolution resets U.S. incentives in the region and is the only way to reduce violence. Amnesty International, citing Paul O'Brien in 2022, finds that Biden must prioritize the advancement of human rights over short-term interests. If the U.S. continues on its current course, it will embolden abusive governments to crush the rights of millions of people. Diplomacy works. The U.S. is needed for peace deals and reaching agreements. Gordon, 2000 from Brookings, finds that without the American role as an honest broker, the parties will neither reach nor stick to agreements. Without U.S. encouragement, aid, threats, cajoling, and risk-taking are certainly going to occur. Our second contention is Iraq. Iraq is about to enter a civil war. Hussein, 22, finds that a stalemate between Shiites and Tehran seems to be leading the country towards civil war. Iraq is about to plunge into a civil war that could spill beyond its borders. CFR from last week finds that Iraq faces significant challenges and ongoing tensions that could spill over. Iraq faces significant challenges in its recovery from its war against ISIS. More than 2 million people remain internally displaced and nearly 9 million remain in need of humanitarian assistance following the 4-year-long war. The new government must also deal with the demobilization and integration of powerful Shiite militias as well as ongoing tensions with Kurdish groups. Luckily, the U.S. can uniquely resolve tensions between the rival factions that do not support either side. Wahab 22 finds that U.S. officials may be able to affect Iraq's behavior by leveraging its need for international legitimacy. Washington shows a proposal to host rival Shia faction for dialogue, opposed to can play a potent moderating role in Baghdad. Indeed, Fact 22 confirms that by engaging a wide range of Iraq subgroups, not just fine, the U.S. can create a way ahead and increase the value of cooperation for all sides. U.S. engagement could prove profitable. Unfortunately, after this diplomacy, civil war is inevitable, as Swatch 22 finds that Iraq is nearing the brink of a Shiite civil war. The increasingly violent rivalry between polarized political wings could dissolve into all-out internal warfare, given the heavily armed population, and civil war would spill over. Ferguson 706 finds that the escalating civil war in Iraq has the potential to spill over into neighboring countries like Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Syria. And Brown at 22 finds that in Iraq, Afghanistan, Yemen, Syria, and Pakistan, past spillover conflicts, 387,000 civilians have died of violent death as a result of these wars. Our third contention is the Iraq nuclear deal. Trump abandoned the Iran nuclear deal. Robinson 22 finds that under the Iran nuclear agreement, Iran agreed to dismantle much of its nuclear program and open its facilities to more extensive international inspections in exchange for billions of dollars worth of sanctions relief. However, the deal has been in jeopardy since President Donald Trump withdrew the U.S. from it in 2018. Iran has resumed some of its nuclear activities. The reimposing of sanctions after the deal's failure supercharged conservatives' narrative and brought them to power. Slahi 22 finds that President Rouhani, who served from 2013 until 2021, promised moderate policies as well as repairing relations with the West. But in 2021, frustrated hardliners engineered the election of a deeply conservative cleric, current President Ibrahim Raisi, whose task would be to deliver a traditionalist government with the hardliners hoped would deliver economic prosperity at home and cement Iran's position as a regional power, turning Iranians away from the West when prosperity failed to materialize. The hardliners blame Iran's poor economic performance on Western sanctions. The conservative regime has used it to fuel its fire. Iran has recently launched a barrage of threats and accusations against several external actors, which accuse it being behind the protests that have erupted across the country, including the U.S. and Israel. They wish to direct its internal crises outward by inciting tensions with neighboring states. Thus, CFR 22 finds that as Iran advances its nuclear program and trains proxy forces throughout the Middle East, the potential for conflict continues to increase. But Biden can solve. Robinson 22 finds that renewed diplomacy initially seemed promising, but after stop-and-go talks, it remains unclear if the parties can come to an agreement. But International Crisis Group 22 finds that a pathway to a deal still exists, and Stewart 22 finds that absent peace, Iranian aggression could devastate West Asia because they couldn't be incentivized to launch nuclear weapons. Bowser 20 finds this could lead to nuclear war.
Winning a contention was diplomatic capital. Asian alliances are balanced, but riddle song 22. Diplomacy with South Korea and Japan appears to be dropping home regional alliances. The credibility issue stems from Pentagon strategy, which seeks to win one war while deterring in another region. Biden's assurance delayed allies concerns to an extent. However, affirming SAP's diplomatic capital could tend, given finite resources, the U.S. must make choices on how much DipCap to invest. It can't equally invest in every crisis. Policymakers need to consider where security interests are at stake. Empirically, Fontaine 21. Obama's efforts to secure a Middle East deal chose the international issue with the least chance of resolution and decided to devote maximum resources to it. Diplomatic expenditures could have been better directed in the Indo-Pacific. Time and attention represents a precious commodity easily squandered. Asia would reel in response. Walls for 21. Tokyo loses confidence in the U.S. could cause allies to develop strike capabilities, possibly escalating into war. Beijing would preempt Japan, causing escalation that would draw in the U.S. Even discussion would cause worsen security, devastatingly charged. War 21. Asia-Pacific flashpoints based on territorial disputes, political differences can snowball, turning nuclear. Consider to Turkey. Currently, Malden 22, Finland and Sweden are on track to join NATO despite friction since Turkey's under pressure to ratify their bids. However, increased diplomatic pressure poisons relations. Gallup 21, Washington made Kurds in Syria de facto allies, and the U.S. commitment now exists and must be honored. Backing the faction has potential for trouble. Desire for homeland and makes Kurds in Turkey. Specifically, Malden 22, Erdogan threatens to veto the Nordic nation NATO bid, deciding relations with the Kurd, a U.S. partner. Continued accession is key to Arctic stability. From 22, Russia takes advantage of a retreat of ice militarization in the region, and China has shown interest in energy deposits. NATO hasn't done much, but Ukraine had made allies aware. Sweden and Finland will secure Arctic through NATO. Both bring icebreakers and effective submarines. A robust Arctic strategy to contain Russia and China. Tensions flare up fair in 18. The Arctic risk of a nuclear escalation and arms race as nuclear powers modernize. The thought could further destabilize the nuclear balance. We're the closest ever to doomsday. Consider 3's regional stability. Subpoint A is GCC. As America disengages, regional cooperation is rising. Manning 22. Middle East states need to hedge against the fear that the U.S. is no longer dependable. The unprecedented Israeli summit with Bahrain, Morocco, Egypt, and UAE marked rapprochement. Erdogan has embarked on his own reconciliation campaign. A Saudi-Iran destiny appears to be taking shape. The new Middle East might actually work because of less prominent U.S. Specifically, Al-Qaeda 21 furthers. GCC states have engaged in significant cooperation to combat finance of terror, disrupted transactions, shut down donations, and enforce sanctions. Efforts disrupted mass transactions, fueled fundraising cells. Overall, Crowder 21 concludes. Gulf countries put aside differences and committed to combat terror in the region. Re-engagement reverses progress. Ashford 18. American predominance prevents states from balancing in the face of threats as they would in the absence of U.S. presence. States expected to form alliances have rarely done so. U.S. involvement inhibits developing ties. Counter-terrorism cooperation is key. Middleburg 20. Regional cooperation can be a roadmap to counter bioterror. Advances in tech drastically reduce cost and time of developing weapons. Al-Qaeda and ISIS have expressed interest, creating a looming threat. Bioterror is existential. Watch 21. An engineered pathogen was spread and killed quicker, evade countermeasures, and be reintroduced again and again. It could wipe off the face of the planet. Regionalism also causes conflict. Velasco 13. Regional organizations are 6 months sometimes more likely to craft an agreement not broken for at least 5 years. There's a substantial difference in keeping peace. Subpoint B is Israel. Murdoch 9. U.S. security assurances have the greatest impact on Israel's calculus on whether it should act preemptively as in Iraq, Syria, and Iran. However, peaceful diplomacy foregoes military action, wrecking Israeli assurance. Passy 22. To stop Iran nuclear ambitions, Israel pushes military operations. Lapid publicly iterated diplomacy will not stop Iran. The only way is military power. Diplomacy also appeases adversaries, forcing Jerusalem's hand. During 15. A diplomatic engagement of Iran and Assad would assemble a posse of tyrants. If the Israelis, who've long regarded Iran as an existential threat, engagement policy was misguided. Israel would have no choice but to strike. Al-Kadbi 21 confirms Netanyahu, upon his return to power, could order an attack on Iran if the U.S. can't take action. Israel has prepared capabilities for a strike. In such a conflict, Avery 22, Russia and China might be drawn in. Nuclear weapons would be used intentionally or by accident. Global famine would result. It could destroy civilization. Subpoint C, Saudi Arabia. In contrast to his neighbors, increased diplomacy means decreased support for Saudi Arabia. Alto, Story 21. To set up diplomacy in Yemen, Biden stated that he would end all American support for offensive operations. Carter 22. This would stop support for Saudi intelligence sharing and efforts to intercept with the attacks. This engagement will not end the war, but will damage all relations. That's sparks Saudi prolif. Guzanski 15. The perception of the U.S. as an unreliable ally may convince Saudi to pursue its own deterrence through nukes. Prolif would be disastrous. Element 11. A decision to seek nukes would increase incentives of other nations in the Middle East to pursue weapons of their own. Given close proximity, new nuclear powers might launch on a warning or use forces preemptively. Low-level commanders on heightened miscalc with sophisticated systems and attack might be attributed incorrectly, or non-state actors could gain access to arsenals. Moreover, Goldenberg 17. A lack of trust in the U.S. has led Saudis to act aggressively out of insecurity, arming Syria, Bahrain, and most notably Yemen. Lest we... Okay.
Ready for cross?
Yeah.
Should I just go with open cross? If you want to.
Open cross.
I feel like it'd be more fun.
Yeah, that's
Dude,
fine.
so we have 3 grand crosses?
Yeah.
That's so hype. I'm so down.
Alright, we'll do 3 grand. Can I have first question?
Yeah.
Alright. So why is it in Japan, Israel, and Saudi's best interest to get nuclear weapons, even if it means losing all their US aid?
Because the point is that the U.S. leaves them when we focus on West Asia.
They get the
so they're
nuclear
already
weapons
losing.
when
Wait,
U.S.
so Israel... Wait, but Israel is in West Asia. I'm confused. I'm talking about generally Israel, Saudi Arabia, and Japan, right?
Yes.
Why would they... What is their calculus in that losing all U.S. trade, all U.S. support, all U.S. foreign aid in response for making nuclear
Well,
weapons?
one, like, if you... We can, like, frontline this later, but, like, specifically on Japan, right? Like the point of the argument is that they like the U.S. them losing U.S. support is what causes them to proliferate. So they've already lost it.
And
The
also,
point is that
we'd argue just countries like are concerned more about their
So-
security than economics.
If we affirm, right, does that mean Japan is losing every ounce of its U.S. support, or does that just mean U.S. support maybe in the worst case scenario slightly decreases?
So one, it's enough to meet the bright line where our evidence says that it would cause regional de-escalation, and two, our evidence says that even like
Wait, regional
discussion
de-escalation? You mean regional escalation?
regional escalation.
Okay.
And two, our evidence says that even discussion can like worsen deterrence.
Do you mind if I take a question?
Okay, so even the U.S. discussing
No, like the country's
leaving the
discussion.
region means that. Okay, yeah, sure. Come on.
All right. So on your C1, you say you say the U.S. is an honest broker. How is the U.S. an honest broker when it clearly takes sides in West Asia specifically?
Well, we're talking about one specific conflict, which is Iraq, right? So in Iraq, the conflict we tell you is of religious
No, this
nature.
is on your C1, not on C2.
Yeah, Iraq. C2 is Iran. Oh, on a peaceful alternative.
Yeah.
Well, actually, Iraq's a great example of that, right?
Okay, sure.
Because, okay, there's two ways, right? First of all, the U.S. isn't always like a non-peaceful broker, right? Because you talk about regionalism, for example, I'd argue like regional brokers are way like more biased because they like take sides religiously, right?
Well, they
so
are
like,
the sides.
for example, exactly.
The regional actors are the sides.
He did.
Can we take a question?
No, let me finish answering real quick. Like, yeah, the regional actors are the side, so they're the more biased out of anyone, right? So if biased actors don't work, if anything, U.S. diplomacy solves better than regionalism.
Well, no, because U.S. like empirically goes into West Asia where there are already sides, and it takes sides further leveraging one side over the other.
Okay.
And that's what causes like escalation and stuff like that.
But if
Like,
anything,
like,
that
cooperating
if
but
biased
fighting
sides are bad, then the actual sides in the conflict are worse. And also, the U.S. is a secular actor; they're not like a religious actor, and a lot of these conflicts are like religiously motivated. Yeah,
Should we take a
question?
Shouldn't that mean that their
Can I take
diplomacy
a-
won't work? Sure, yeah, go ahead.
All right, your Velasco evidence that regional groups are 6.7 times more likely.
Yeah.
What does the Velasco evidence conclude about conflicts that are because of like ethnic differences?
You can read this in rebuttal. Do we have a question?
Yeah.
Let's talk about
Sorry.
Iraq.
Yeah, sure.
Are we close to civil war in the SQO?
Yes.
So how did,
Like tensions go up and down in Iraq, but we're always close to civil war because the government just doesn't have enough power to resolve the like long-standing
If
tensions.
tensions go up
Civil
and
war
down-
can break out at any
Yeah,
point.
but uniquely now they're
why?
the protest.
Yeah,
There are
because
always
the protests.
What are unique about the protests this time?
The point is that the Iraq civil war is eventually going to spill over. It's not a question of when. It's not a question of if. It's a question of when.
Yeah,
Your
but
question
We're
is-
solving the internal tensions in Iraq
It's a
that threaten to
question of
spill
why.
over into the
Why
region.
now?
Your evidence is from 6 years or
What?
2006 that says spillover.
No.
Yeah.
Okay, well, no, but the evidence that there's like spillover remains true in any Middle Eastern conflict,
yeah, that's
especially
fair.
one in like not even the Gulf region, in like the center of West Asia. That's cross.
Okay.
Yeah.
Like, oh crap. You sure?
Can you sorry, hold on, can you
Okay. The phone's dead.
okay, starting running.
Yeah. Okay.
That was 2 seconds each. Okay. I could send speech doc.
Yeah, for sure. We'll do the same thing.
Cool.
Do an actual speech doc, CPS, not the email, not just paste an email.
Oh,
Very cool.
Yeah,
So,
like
um,
yeah. I'll do like a Word doc.
Yeah.
I can send cards for anything after. Don't have them like all compiled in one thing, but what's your code? What's your code?
EP.
EP. Okay.
Yeah, CPS, can you reattach, download, reattach?
Oh yeah. Let me do that right now.
Wait, Daniel, how do I send it? Do I just save a copy?
Yeah, save a copy.
No. Oh my god. There we go. There we go. Okay, I sent my speech. I really have no idea how long it's gonna take, but it might be under, might be over. I'll resend if I feel.
Okay. I also just resent our case.
Very cool. I'm ready. Just top down. On diplomatic capital, 7 responses. First, political capital is fake. Herschel retained. Political capital is a meaningless term. The idea is so poorly defined that pundits often get it wrong. It misleads far more than it enlightens. It suggests erroneously that a political figure has a concrete number of a political capital to invest. Their scenario is dumb. It's not actually going to be this direct trade-off. There's a lot of things they have to prove. A, how much it costs. B, how much you need. There's a lot of ambiguity here. 2, winning conflicts that turn it because winning that conflicts are solved in the squo turns their argument because conflicts inherently require a lot of diplomatic capital. Thus, if we decrease the amount of conflicts that we are freeing up more diplomatic capital for other issues, which you can divert more to these important things. This co-ops our effect because our case is critical to political capital. It allows us to divert more attention to China and decreases the chance of their scenario. Third, again, we'd argue that affirming means increasing our diplomatic capabilities. It means if you affirm and you don't have enough diplomatic capabilities in the scope, you're probably going to have to, in order to fulfill the resolution, if we're going to have to increase our diplomatic capabilities. Fourth, we probably take diplomatic research from other places. The Fontaine link evidence is terrible. A, it's talking about Trump's terrible diplomacy. B, the Catullus evidence that we have indicates that there's been a shift in the U.S. policy where it's now peaceful. We'd argue that we'd probably take diplomatic resources from other places other than Southeast Asia. 5, their Wadsworth's evidence is terrible. Increasing our diplomacy in the Middle East does not mean we stop our nuclear umbrella. Japan has never feel it's threatened. It never pulls. Their scenario never happens. 6, North Korea never actually fires because Pengli 22 confirms that any nuclear attack on the U.S. or its allies by North Korea would result in the end of the Kim regime. Thus, they may test, but they'll never attack. 7, China cares about its economy. It'll never attack either. Go to Turkey. A couple of responses. First, they're misconstruing the cause of the reservations. Truck 22, Turkey opposes Sweden and Finland joining NATO because Sweden has supported members of the PKK. Second, their Malden evidence is absolutely terrible. It literally says that the problems between Turkey and NATO specifically, not between the United States. It says that specifically in the card that nothing changes in the afterworld. Third, diplomacy will help the passive bit because right now we'd probably argue that it probably decreases the tensions and it deals with the underlying tensions. 4, 2 warrants why it doesn't get past. A, they probably won't not pass because then they'll probably be sanctioned. B, Turkey wants to just hold out to gain concessions. Once they get the concessions, they'll let it pass it. On the Arctic thing, 4 responses. First, there's no internal link onto why the Turkey thing into the Arctic. 2, it's not up to NATO. If Russia and China actually want to militarize, they will. 3, 2 non-interventionist countries are not the bright line for saving the Arctic. If these countries, if Russia and China want to militarize in the Arctic, they're going to anyway. 4, we'd argue that United States diplomacy probably solves the conflict because if there's going to be militarization of the status quo, then the best thing to stop militarization is to actually do diplomacy and send talks. And if we deal with the underlying talks with Turkey, that's probably going to have a cascading effect where there's probably demilitarization in the Arctic. Go to the next argument about the GCC. A bunch of responses. First, turn it ignore the first response. Wolf 10, regional organizations often fail to respond in timing to prevent a violent conflict because of weakness and political disagreements within the organization. The GCC fails. Second, the regional organizations actually help dictators. Debris 19, an empirical study concluded that research suggested that autocratic states exploit regionalism to boost domestic regime security. Regional organizations can help to strengthen survival chances of autocratic elites. That's because they have to include autocrats in their own organizations, which means that autocrats have a voice. 3, the divisions that plague the Middle East have and always will exist because A, the people view each other as existential threats, and B, the government gets political legitimacy from reinforcing the idea that they're combating these evil rivals. Absent U.S. involvement, there's always fighting. Then their Velasco evidence that they cite, it's absolutely terrible. It's terminal defense in their case because it concedes, or their Velasco evidence concedes that in times of ethnic. In situations where there's ethnic divides and regional organizations actually make the problems worse and they're now able to solve it. A, it's unspecifically, it's broadly, it's not specific. It's specifically in ethnic things, regional organizations are terrible. B, it concedes that regional organizations do not work in ethnic divides. This means that they will never be effective in their world. On the impact narrative about terror, 3 turns. First, the only way to solve terrorism is through diplomacy. Indeed, Culbertson 22 explains that preventing terrorism will require diplomacy, including that military means alone will not be sufficient. Co-op their impact, the only side any solvency is the act. The current world is rampant with terrorism, but in order to actually solve it, we need large-scale diplomacy. Second, turn it again because solving conflicts is a prerequisite to terrorism. Brokers 13, instability and conflict splinter societies and stir up terrorism. The affirmative solve for these conflicts is the Center for American Progress. 21 explains that the Middle East requires renewed U.S. diplomatic efforts to end destructive internal armed conflicts in Syria and Yemen. U.S. diplomacy will be critical to de-escalating these wars. The root cause of terrorism and conflict, diplomatic efforts solve for conflict. Third, affirming benefits, anti-American sentiments. That's what Singapore tells you, which probably turns their case on Israel. A bunch of problems. First, they still have the United States security agreed. 2, the Murdoch evidence concedes that Israel is actively preemptively before. 3, the Doran evidence is that Iran threatens Israel. Winning at Iran straight turn on Saudi Arabia. It's inevitable as hard as 13, and also they'll never prolific because of sanctions. Also, the global governance is terminally not unique because it said that Saudi didn't trust the United States in 2017, which means they should have already prolified by now.
Can you repeat the responses on Saudi Arabia? Never prolific with sanctions.
1, they'll prolific because China. 2, they won't. Or it's inevitable because China can help them. 2, like sanctions will either they overthrow or sanctions will deter them. And then 3, the Goldberg evidence says that Saudi didn't trust them in 2017.
Us.
They said Saudi didn't trust the United States in 2017,
So
which means this scenario should have happened.
Okay. Can you send the cards?
Every card?
Yeah. I sent
There's a
it.
doc and then there's a card at the bottom.
Yeah, it's at the bottom.
I got you.
Okay, everyone good? Cool. Alright, time starts now. Will agree dip caps fake on the turn. 1, they've conceded even discussion worsens deterrence and escalates into war. 2, it relies on conflicts getting solved. That's impossible per the warranting that they give, and we'll get through it on their case. On Turkey, they say the PKK, that's the entire argument. We negotiate with the PKK, which causes Turkey to block NATO. They say NATO, but the US is the biggest country in NATO, and it's perceptual. On they say tensions are down. It's the tensions with Sweden, that's tensions in the Middle East. The argument's not the same. On the Arctic scenario, group all of these things are blippy analytics. Our evidence says that Turkey and Sweden specifically would be able to solve rising tensions through deterrence. On GCC, they say regional systems fail. They conceded it's working down, tensions are going down. They say dictators, but the Middle East is already dictators, and the US backs these dictators like Saudi Arabia. They say divisions always exist, but we can always deter conflict, and it takes out their case. They say Velasco's bad. We're not going for Velasco. We're going for the bioterror stuff. Okay, go to the terrorism responses. Group all of them. 1, they've conceded the uniqueness that even if terrorism exists, we're still able to combat it through regionalism, which is why there's no bioterror now, and we'll get to that on their case. And thirdly, you can turn it because we say that diplomacy is perceived as U.S. military intervention per their overview, which worsens anti-American sentiment. On Israel, they really messed up. They give not very good responses. The first is that they have more security, but 1, they can see that diplomacy trades off per their own overview, which means Israel has to strike, and it's perceptible. They say they've acted before. That's empirics for us. It means it's likely that Israel will strike. They say Iran's turn, but 1, the point is that diplomacy is not enough to stop them. That's our Lapid evidence. And 2, you can turn it because it causes an Israeli strike. Carmen 22, if a new nuclear agreement is reached, there's little doubt Israel will take military action to bomb Iran's facilities. On Saudi, on the China response, 1, there's no warranting why China supports them, and 2, their evidence is about arms. China's obviously not selling them nukes. They say sanctions deter, but 1, the U.S. wouldn't sanction our closest ally. 2, it's obviously filled with Iran's proliferating now, and 3, Saudi Arabia cares about diplomacy more than this. They say Goldenberg, but we didn't fully abandon them. That was just an empiric. Our evidence says we would cut off arms, which then caused them to proliferate. Their case. On the overview. 1, their warrant is about oil, but there's no reason fracking can't solve America's now net export, which means it's not needed. But 2, the military-industrial complex could just lobby for wars in other regions like Asia, which means it's not needed. But 3, there's no reason we withdraw our military completely. It stays regardless in the region. They read no evidence that it trades off. But 4, intervention actually deters conflict by raising the cost of aggression. Empirics prove. Lily 18, the data show an overall trend towards reduction of the total number of armed conflicts that occur. Increased U.S. military presence in the Gulf has corresponded to more stability. But 5, there's no trade-off. Ruben 20, such sentiments may be rhetorically satisfying, but they are an intellectual strawman. Diplomacy may be a valuable tool, but is not a panacea, nor diplomacy or military mutually exclusive. But 6, they say the U.S. is good, but the alternative is better. All but TV 22, officials calling to China due to war to end to end civil wars by helping peace talks and increasing aid pieces in China's interest because they will revitalize ports which will aid China's BR. China can persuade Iran from supporting Houthis in Yemen. On Iraq. 1, Iran is non-topical. Resolve is defined as Cambridge as solve and end a problem. Resolve is not synonymous with prevent. Prevention doesn't require a problem, but in potential one, resolve presumes a problem, which is nothing short of an ongoing internal conflict. 2, there's no civil war, meaning no impact, and it's non-topical. Al Jazeera 22, the fighting that broke out was over as quickly as it started. Cooler heads always seem to prevail in Iraq. If a political deal can be made, the Iraqis will take it. But 3, we back the wrong side. Ruben 22, the U.S. backed former PM al-Qadami to combat militias and tilt Iraq away from Iran. Not only was this ineffective, but his corruption sticks to America and leaves Iraq worse off. But 4, U.S. diplomacy in Iraq is counterproductive. Ruben 22, diplomacy is poison for Iraq. The U.S. Officials view the country only through the lens of Iran. 2, Washington prioritizes short-term fixes at the expense of long-term reform. A freedom left for failure. Cut the next few lines. Yeah. Cool. Let's go to Iran. Just cut all the other responses. Oh, also the evidence from spillover is from 2006. It should have happened on Iran. 1, their impact is 20 seconds over time. They rate an internal link, no impact. 2, their uniqueness is unrest, but it's ending. Hafizi 22, Iran executions have instilled enough fear to keep people off the streets after months of anti-government unrest. But 3, Biden no longer wants a deal. Nelson 22, Biden lets up the Iran nuclear deal is dead. The State Department confirmed that talks were no longer on the agenda. It has been for some time. Iran may not ever be in position to return to compliance. This means Iran is always emboldened. But 4, they say Iran would have incentives, but don't list what the incentives are. Iran always has the incentive to expand to gain leverage. But 5, turn because of funding. Reuters 22, Iran has demanded that U.S. financial sanctions imposed by Trump be scrapped as part of any deal. We give Iran $100 billion a year to undermine stability in the Middle East, which always because they can only expand with funding. But lastly, on their impact scenario, 1, again, it was over time and under-warranted. 2, there have been proxies for decades with no war. They have no fully warranted internal link to nuclear war. Doesn't matter. I didn't read the 4th or 5th response. I didn't read the second half of the 4th response on Iraq.
Cool.
And I read everything else.
Can I get it? Oh, it's hard. Oh, you want to get a question?
I'll resend what I read from the 4th.
Oh, it's crossed. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah.
You make first question.
Okay.
You want to wait, or you gonna send anything?
I just sent the card with what I read, what I read.
Okay. Wait. Okay. Can I get the first question?
Yeah.
The Rubin evidence says that there's no trade-off if you increase diplomacy. So what is your scenario in Saudi or Israel? the Rubin evidence you read on RC1, you said that if we increase our diplomacy, we don't decrease our
No.
military.
The
That's
argument.
what the Rubin evidence says.
So the argument is that generally the argument you are making that diplomacy trades off
Right.
is not true, right? Because we
Right.
can do both at the same time.
Right.
The link into Saudi and Israel is fully different because the Saudi link, for example, is about a specific resolution that is on the table right now and would be implemented post-HAP.
But if they still have a security guarantee, why would they prolong?
They wouldn't have a security guarantee.
No,
Because
you
the
just
US
told
stopped
me that
supporting
they
its
still have the
offensive
military troops, which are the
So
security
it's
guarantee.
it's a claim of specificity, right? You're your overview is very general, saying it trades off, which the Rubin evidence responds to, and then says specifically within the context of Saudi Arabia, that's not true.
Alright, can I
And
ask a
Israel.
question?
You know,
Can you name me one time U.S. diplomacy has solved anything for terrorism?
one time U.S. diplomacy solved terrorism. Oh, we would argue that in the past, the United States has prioritized military over actual diplomacy. So in the past, when we tried to combat terrorism, we haven't actually defaulted to actual talks and actual diplomacy in order to peacefully resolve things, which only escalate situations.
So the U.S. has never done diplomacy in the past before?
I mean, we have done diplomacy, but we haven't done it as effectively as we could because we've been prioritizing.
So it's never
military.
solved for terrorism. Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about this Arctic scenario.
Yeah.
So why are Sweden and Finland the two bright lines for Arctic
So
militarization?
it says there's like
They bring icebreakers. And
yes,
submarines.
icebreakers and
So
submarines.
they're
are
the
missiles.
only ones that have icebreakers.
They have the best icebreaker.
And the only ones in NATO right now that have
Yeah.
this. Or that are going to join NATO.
You know,
And it also says they would they're both on the Arctic Council, so they would lead an Arctic strategy to contain Russia and China.
is the United States in there?
No.
The United States.
No.
That's
Uh,
unfortunate.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. That's why we need them. What does Israel think about the Iran nuclear deal?
What does Israel think about the Iran?
Yeah, do they like it or not like it?
Israel probably doesn't want Iran to have nukes. So
Yeah, but do they think the Iran nuclear deal is the best way to do that?
if it means Iran, if it's a trade-off between Iran having nukes or the Iran nuclear deal, they probably like Iran.
All right. Well, yeah, we'll switch to that. You can have a question.
I really have a question. How's your day been, Logan?
It's been pretty good.
What about me?
Yeah. What about Ahmad?
Ahmad, how are you doing? You know, I didn't know you were Ahmad. And I think we had a little conversation.
Sad.
Yeah, I was on a judge panel with you, bro.
What?
Yeah, on Zoom.
Oh, yeah, that's
Oh.
right.
But he
Dude,
didn't
I was
even
like
care
partially-
about.
Hey, I care. I care about the snowy showdown.
I can't believe you squirreled in that, bro.
That was so funny.
It's his wallpaper on his phone.
Yeah.
Oh,
Snowy
6-1.
showdown.
Six-
Yeah,
no,
right.
it's 6-1.
No, 1-6.
You should show the camera.
It's so funny.
All right, that's cross. Good cross.
Yeah, that's really fun. Alright, we have 258 starting.
I believe that's y'all's.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, that's on.
Very well.
All right, I don't think I'm reading any new F. Sorry, let me just organize my computer, but like, I'm ready to go. All right. All right. I'm gonna start on like I'll do just our case, their case weighing. This should be fine. Great. Starting on a peaceful alternative, we can see that there's no trade-off of violent military diplo when we increase peaceful diplomacy. This kicks us out of the first contention on peaceful all the turns, but it also kicks us out of our Iran contention because we're not actually decreasing any political military diplomacy or going for the Iran nuclear deal. But it also kicks us out of their contentions on Saudi Arabia and Israel. I'll get to that later. Now to our second contention about Iraq. They say there's no civil war occurring right now. This is completely wrong because there were protests less than a month ago. They talked about 6 years ago. That's just a spillover evidence. The actual evidence about a civil war breaking out very soon was less than a month ago. And even if we slightly step back from the brink, the tensions are still there, and the tensions are worse than they ever were before because they're specifically religiously motivated. Iraq from 4 days ago is still dealing with these type of tensions, with internal armed conflict, with Shia militias, and with problems in infrastructure after the fall of ISIS, after they defeated ISIS. So there's still possibility of civil war in Iraq, and It's not from 6 years ago, it's from 1 month ago. There's protests 1 month ago, and it's going to be religious conflict, which is worse than anything else. They say U.S. diplomacy is counterproductive because we support personalities. That's the entire problem, is that when we don't have enough diplomacy, we only have enough resources to support personalities. We're going to support the government when we go into Iraq. The government is specifically asking for United States support. According to Reuters from 2 days ago, the government is asking for United States support in Iraq. We're going to support the government, and we're going to solve the future civil war. They also don't interact with the specific warranting that we're engaging multiple different subgroups. We're not only supporting one side in Iraq. That's why the United States is so helpful in Iraq, because we're supporting all the different Shia and Sunni subgroups. We're not religiously motivated. We're not only supporting one person. This evidence is older. It predates our evidence that we're going to engage all the different subgroups. And again, if otherwise civil war is inevitable and it spills over regionally, this is the largest impact in the conflict, because we impact out to worsen all of their arguments about Saudi Arabia and Iran, which will be provoked if there's another conflict in the region. Now, under the same contention about Turkey, they say that we're going to negotiate in anger, but Turkey is already mad at us, and they're mad at NATO in general, not just the U.S. It doesn't matter if the U.S. is the largest power in NATO. The people who don't want Turkey to join NATO are the other powers in NATO. They're not going to let Turkey join NATO anyway, and also Finland and Sweden don't need to join NATO because they can still participate in the Arctic Council. They literally admit that Finland and Sweden are on the Arctic Council. They don't actually give private warning about why they actually have to be in NATO to solve the issues in the Arctic. Also, they're non-interventionist actors anyway, so chances are they're not actually going to stand up to Russia. And even if they do, it's not because they're in NATO. It's because they're in the Gulf Cooperation Council. They're allies with the U.S. They can solve either way. They say that okay, now onto regional stability. They completely dropped the idea that the regional organizations are weak. The GCC failed. It helps authoritarian leaders. Now in Israel, they can see that there's no actual trade-off because an increase in peaceful diplomacy doesn't mean that we're going to decrease our security guarantees to Israel. They make this random claim that just because we're increasing peaceful diplomacy to Israel means that we're going to completely get rid of all our security guarantees with Israel, which is just not the case. And same with Saudi Arabia. Just because we increase peaceful diplomacy doesn't actually mean that we're decreasing military diplomacy or support for these countries. Therefore, they would have no reason to proliferate. This is a completely non-unique argument. Now into the weighing. There's some points we win on probability because this is a conflict that's going to spill over in the status quo. It's going to actually link into their impacts because Israel and regional stability are going to be worse, and regional organizations are going to worsen by the new conflict in Iraq. No one's going to be able to rely on any allies anymore. Conflict is going to spill over to Syria and impact their Israeli proliferation. Again, vote for the affirmative.
We'll take some prep. All right. Yeah, we'll start that now. That was another 210 used. We used what was it 37?
Yeah.
13 left. It's gonna go. You're F. It's gonna go neg, weighing, F, probably more weighing.
Come on, can I have the pen?
Oh
Sorry.
yeah, no worries.
Thanks.
Yeah. Judges ready? Opponents? Go. On the GCC fails and helps authoritarian leaders, there's no impact or warrants extended, so it doesn't even matter. But let's go to Israel first. The only response is that we wouldn't decrease security, but we aren't going for that link. We're going for the turn on independent links. They've literally conceded that our argument is perceptual and turns the case, and when we do diplomacy, we would lift sanctions on Iran with the precondition and give Iran hundreds of billions of dollars, as well as doing the Iran nuclear deal, which Israel views as an existential threat since it allows Iran to still get nukes, which diplomacy isn't efficient. And they've entirely conceded that our link is perceptual because Israel views them as an existential threat. At that point, extend. Israel has always viewed Iran as an existential threat, but the security guarantee America's military provides has always prevented Israel from taking the offensive strike. Unfortunately, a new American diplomatic overture would be seen as Israel as weakness, leading to its strikes in Iran, culminating devastating region-wide war, drawing in outside powers like Russia and China, ultimately leading to a nuclear winter and extinction. Then let's go to Saudi Arabia. Extended. While America and Saudi Arabia have been staunch allies for decades, Biden's new policy mean affirming would end military support for Saudis to end the war in Yemen. Unfortunately, this diplomatic push would be meaningless in the end, where Yemen, something the monarchy views as protecting the regime, rather they force Saudi to pursue independent deterrence through nuclear weapons, program cascading through the West Asia, which spirals into conflict because they, which leads to extinction and nuclear war from induced famine. Their only response is that we wouldn't decrease military diplomacy, but that is unresponsive, and their argument is too general. Specifically, Saudi Arabia are evidence, which is uncontested that Saudi would lash out if the U.S. stops their offensive operations through diplomacy. That flows through, and our link is on specific proposal on the table. Rubin is general about intervention. Also, arms sales are an intervention. But then they say Iraq would worsen security, but this is untrue. Literally, during the rise of ISIS, Iraq and countries didn't proliferate since we still have good security guarantees with them, which is why the prereq doesn't apply. But second, there's no union if the countries that are proliferating now. On the weighing, we outweigh on time because both the Saudi Arabia and the Israel scenarios are hinging on perception. Perception triggers instantly just like a gun, and that's where you're pulling the trigger. It also prereqs by causing region-wide instability and nuclear war, which causes worsen all the scenarios. But second on scope, because Saudi Arabia causes spillover, which is cold conceded. Extend the golden ring Saudi lessors by arming groups from Yemen to Bahrain. On their cases, on the overview, the China diplomacy better turn is 100% conceded in the last page. Extend the U.S. diplomacy cries out the trades off off with China's diplomacy, which is the turn conceded is substantially better because China has economic interests as allies with everyone and it doesn't have any anti-American sentiment. Weigh this in two ways. First, it turns their just go there. On probability is completely drop your tech over to the judges. You have to wait 100% probability. In Daniel's last speech, he only did probability weighing, and insofar as we're winning the probability weighing because it's 100% drop, we're winning the weighing. It's like not even close. But then go to Iraq. They say we're supporting the government, but that's the point. We're supporting the wrong side. What we've empirically done, which outweighs on probability and worsens the problem because there's no more corruption. Then they say scope, but they've completely conceded their evidence is from 2006, but there's no spillover. None of their weighing matters. They have not convinced us one time this round why there is going to be a civil war in Iraq now. We argued, and they conceded in cross that there's literally been tensions for the past years. Their evidence from 2006 saying that there's going to be a spillover, but they've never said once why there's going to be a civil war now. They've literally never warranted. You cannot even buy their uniqueness. There's no way you can vote for that. But then they say there's escalating now, but resolve is not synonymous with prevent. Prevention doesn't require a problem, but a potential one. Resolve presumes a problem, which is nothing short of an ongoing internal armed conflict per the resolution. There's been tensions, but no actual war. At the end of the day, you're buying both the Israel and Saudi scenarios on a perception, and also you're buying the China turn, which is completely conceded outweighs on probability. They only did probability weighing. We did scope magnitude probability. All of that, we're winning everything.
Okay, go good for Grant. Alright, you can take first.
Okay, so on this China turn, right?
Yeah.
Like the uniqueness on the China turn is that when the US pulls out, China fills in, right? But the US not pulling out.
Yeah,
the whole point of the whole way we kicked out of C1 is we did read that response.
The way
whole way, let me finish.
Yeah.
The whole way we kicked C1, right? And that was the China turn was on C1. The whole way we kicked C1 is because we said U.S. increasing peaceful diplo doesn't decrease military diplo.
Okay,
so there's no room for China to fill in, so there's no uniqueness.
The China turn has literally nothing to do with military. It's about the U.S. diplomacy being there, crowding out Chinese diplomacy through like economics and supporting like proxies. It has literally nothing to do with military. So you saying military doesn't apply with literally zero implication specifically on the China turn and your last speech, you can't come up and do it in final. But number two, even if you are right, it still doesn't matter because you didn't make that implication.
Okay. All right. Do you want to
Oh yeah, and on the uniqueness stuff, it doesn't matter. Increasing Chinese diplomacy is still good. It's still scalar and still solves your offense.
Okay. Do you have a question? Or can I have another one?
You can have another one.
Okay, so let's see. On Saudi Arabia, would you not argue that we've had changes in the perceptual support for Saudi Arabia in the past? Didn't Biden just a couple months ago claim he was going to stop support for Saudi Arabia? So clearly, that's literally perception of what you're talking about, right? So if perception is so important, right? Why haven't we seen Saudi already pro-lift? There's been so many times when the U.S. has pulled support from Saudi Arabia.
No, we need to move that increasing U.S. diplomacy would stop support for Saudi's military offense, which is what we argue would lead to.
I think you guys try to implicate this Reuben stuff to take out literally everything, but the point of the argument is no, it doesn't. The point of the argument is that Reuben is general. We've read evidence A specific to Israel and B specific to Saudi Arabia that says it doesn't apply in those instances.
It's talking about U.S. diplomacy not affecting military.
Right, but we've given you evidence that that's not Reuben isn't true.
It's not really even about Reuben, right? Your link on Saudi Arabia, is about perception, right? And what we're arguing is that Saudi Arabia's perception of U.S. support for them shifts all the time.
It's not only perception though; it's that through peaceful diplomacy, the U.S. would stop supporting military. Literally,
even if
operations.
can I finish?
Yeah.
Even if you're right that sure Biden says a lot of stuff and claims a lot of stuff, the point of our argument is that yes, tensions with the U.S. and Saudi Arabia have been hesitant for a while, but they still trust us and aren't proliferating because we're selling them arms. You've conceded that independent of perception, we stopped selling them arms in an app world, which is the resolution that's on the table in Congress right now, so it gets out of Reuben and is comparatively more probable. It says that causes proliferation and nuclear war.
No, we don't concede that. The entire point, the entire concession on C1 is that we're not decreasing military diplomacy, which specifically means we're not decreasing the amount of arms we sell to Saudi Arabia.
Again, it's general. That is general.
I don't understand how
we've given you
matters.
comparative probability analysis that the resolution that is on the table right now in Congress would specifically stop it to Saudi Arabia.
That doesn't matter because you didn't interact specifically with the point that we like, okay, I understand that the resolution in Congress says that we're going to decrease support for Saudi Arabia, right? First of all, that resolution on Congress has been in there, and Saudi hasn't made any moves towards proliferation. I think Saudi hasn't made any moves.
Here's your phone.
Yeah, sure.
Iraq, Saudi, China, and like the Wang debate. Everybody ready?
Yeah.
The most important argument on your ballot is Iraq. Remember that right now there's skirmishes going on between the Sunnis and Shiites, and soon our evidence indicates from just 4 days ago that these tensions are going to boil over into a war that will then spill over to the entire region. That's key because our PFAF and TWAJ evidence indicates that U.S. diplomacy is key to solving this conflict and will bring both of these sides to the table because they're a secular actor in the region, which will be key to stopping conflict that then spill over to the Middle East. That's crucial because that's a prerequisite to every single scenario in the round. That's because if the war happens in there and it spills over to the Middle East, it destabilizes the region, which means the security guarantee that Israel and Saudis believe that they have is lost, and they'll probably proliferate, and everybody will start proliferating, which is why you're going to put our argument on scope. Because even if you buy their entire case in Saudi Arabia and Israel start to proliferate in our world because there's a civil war in there, in their world because there's a civil war that spills over, it's going to be everybody's going to proliferate. So it's a prerequisite, and it also outweighs on scope. On their specific argument, the Saudi Arabia thing is really mishandled. Their evidence is about a simple proposal to remove military troops. The specificity does not matter as far as the evidence they read you in the round indicates that increasing our diplomacy does not at all have anything to do with our military engagement. That delinks their argument that somehow affirming increasing diplomacy means that we're going to take troops out of Saudi Arabia or Israel. And then on the China thing, there's no uniqueness extended. We've conceded that the United States is never going to leave military, which means there's no crowd out and there's no actual effect on China, which doesn't give them access to any of them. On the Wang. Their time frame winning is wrong. It's not perceptual. They need to win first if there's going to be a military disengagement in order for them to win their perceptual link. If there's increased diplomats but there's no actual disengagement of the military, then there's no decrease in security commitment, which means the perception never ever triggers, which means their time frame winning is just unequivocally false. Even if it's then, again, you're going to be voting for the AF still because in the Iraq scenario, there's going to be a spillover effect, which is going to destabilize the entire region, which is then going to lead to everyone proliferating a mass war, which co-ops their impact and outweighs on scope. Confirmed.
Okay, it's gonna start on Iraq and like the responses. Okay. Cool. Okay. So this round is genuinely a lot simpler than it seems. Like Yash just does not respond to any of the Iraq responses that Ahmad gives you in summary. We give you 3 of them, and all of them are dropped. The first one is that they say we're supporting the government, but we're supporting the wrong side. Except that what the United States has empirically done is support the corrupt factions in the government, which is the conceded Reuben evidence. What does this mean? It's a turn because it means that we're supporting the wrong factions in increasing tensions and escalating the tensions in the government, which is a drop turn. There's literally no way to not vote for this. Even then, they say that it's escalating now, but again, they've conceded Ahmad's response. Resolve is not synonymous with prevent. Prevention doesn't require a problem, but a potential one, unless they prove there's a civil war happening in the status quo, which they don't, because they just say protests are going to happen and trigger this, then they literally don't. Okay, they say they prereq everything. We responded to this on our case. You can extend the response that even when tensions were high, for example, in the rise of ISIS, the United States still had security guarantees with Israel and Saudi Arabia. So yes, even if Iraqi tensions are going on for a long time, it never our allies always feel secure, so they never actually strike, and no war actually happens. It's dropped. Okay, given that there's conceded defense and a conceded turn on their case, and we respond to their wing, go to Israel. The only they concede this on the link level. The only response is this cross up from Saudi Arabia that we wouldn't decrease military. But again, we do not need to win the link that military goes down to access the Israel argument. We're extending the turn from their case, which says that if you were to do the resolution, you would have to negotiate with Iran, which our evidence indicates would lift sanctions on them and give them $100 billion per year to undermine stability in the Middle East. And their turn from their second contention, which says that we would do the Iran nuclear deal, which Israel views as a threat to its survival, which means that they have to launch a massive nuclear war against Iran before Iran gets nuclear weapons, which they've conceded caused extinction. Their response to the time frame weighing don't make sense because it's only about perception. But we're not going for the perception argument. We're going for the argument that we would give specifically Iran things like terrorism and like nuclear weapons, which obviously isn't perception and still means that Israel strikes immediately, which they've conceded cause extinction and happens immediately. At the end of the day, Yash just concedes all the stuff on his case, and the responses on our case don't apply. We respond to all the weighing around is over. Good round.